morning. This is David Lopez. I am the co-dean at Rutgers Law School in Newark, and this is Power of Attorney. So today it's my profound pleasure to welcome Professor Doug Eakley. Doug Eakley is the first occupant of the Ellen V. Lowenstein Chair in Corporate and Business Law. He is also the founder and co-director of the Rutgers Center for Corporate Law and Governance and the founder and director of the Rutgers Law School Entrepreneurship Clinic. Professor Eakley has a very deep experience in the legal profession, both in public service and also in the private sector. We'll talk a little bit about that. But today I wanted to really focus on corporate law at Rutgers Law School. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your path to Rutgers Law School?
Well, I grew up in New Jersey, in Westfield, and went away to school. Actually went to Yale and then Oxford. I studied law at Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar and shared a dorm with William J. Clinton.
Rhodes Scholar with President Clinton. That's wonderful.
And then came back. We both came back to Yale Law School and found a beach house where we lived our first year of law school.
And a Rhodes Scholarship. I'm sure your parents were proud, right?
Indeed. It was just an extraordinary experience. And learning law first from an English perspective and a comparative law perspective really helped prepare me to re-enter Yale University at the law school. I started out working in New York City. I clerked for a federal judge and then went to a firm that had a wonderful pro bono profile.
Who did you clerk with?
Harold Tyler.
Okay.
Just a wonderful, wonderful man. Left the bench to be the Deputy Attorney General under Ed Levy in the Ford administration. Mm-hmm. When our first child started walking, we moved back to New Jersey, and it took me another 3 years before I decided to leave Debevoise and Plimpton and join a New Jersey firm. That was Riker Danzig. I ultimately wound up at Lowenstein Sandler, a firm founded by Alan Lowenstein. Yeah. And I was a partner there for about 22, 23 years.
That's wonderful. Debevoise, Riker, and Lowenstein, all great partners with Rutgers Law Schools.
Yeah, really all three committed to public service and public interest law, and I've really enjoyed my stays there.
And tell us about your time at Lowenstein.
I concentrated in complex commercial litigation, securities fraud, derivative litigation, fair amount of accounting fraud, and sort of tried to balance that with a very wide array of pro bono activities. So public interest litigation, as well as participation, starting at about 1998 as a founding trustee of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, something that Alan Lowenstein again and Amy, his wife, had endowed.
Yeah, Alan and Amy Lowenstein are well-known benefactors of the public interest community and have just done wonderful things. What was it like working with him?
I never had the opportunity to work with him. He was a magnificent corporate transactional lawyer, and I was on the litigation side of the practice. But because of his interest in public interest, I was president of Legal Services of New Jersey for close to a decade. He would come to our events. So I got to know him a bit that way. I became friends with his son, Roger. And so when I joined the firm, I had periodic interactions with him, but not on a really working basis until he decided to start the Institute.
And you know what really jumps out about you, Doug, is that you have an accomplished career both in the private sector as a litigator, but also doing public service, both with the Legal Services Corporation and with the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice and many other things as well. Can you tell us about how you came to wear so many different hats?
Well, I have to blame it on my parents, I think, largely. They were wonderful, loving, conscientious, and community-oriented people. My father was clerk of session in our Presbyterian church in which I grew up, and they really set my moral compass. And I think also they were wonderfully empathetic people, and from whom I learned a bit about empathy. And I think it was the sense of social justice that came from that I tried to pursue while still working for a living and to repay my law school loans and the like.
Right. And, you know, one of the things that we try to instill at Rutgers Law School is really the profound sense of public service that really has characterized the best of the legal profession. And, obviously this is something that is near and dear to your heart. Talk a little bit about the Legal Services Corporation and your time there. I know that, the Legal Services Corporation has gone through some ups and downs politically.
Yeah. Legal Services Corporation was created by Act of Congress in 1974. Its function is to provide federal funding to legal aid societies and legal services programs around the country in civil legal matters for low-income Americans. And it has been a political lightning rod virtually from its inception. It was signed into law by President Nixon within 2 weeks prior to his departure from office. President Reagan cut the federal budget by 25% after he took office, having borne the brunt of some litigation brought by legal services programs in California when he was governor. And during my tenure, I was appointed by President Clinton and confirmed by the Senate. A year later, we had I don't know whether it was the 104th or the 105th Congress with its contract on America. And the new Republican majority in the Congress passed a resolution vowing to eliminate federal funding over 3 years, 1/3 at a time, and to impose restrictions on what programs could do with those remaining funds. And so it almost crippled the organization. We had to decide how we were going to cope with this and how do we stop the further reductions in funding and the like. So it was a rough, bumpy several years, but I think we finally regained credibility with both sides of the aisle. And Senator Domenici was one of the key leaders that helped us cross the aisle. And I'm pleased to say that it is alive and doing about as well as it can be under the current circumstances. But it's just been a wonderful program.
But we as a nation still face challenges with legal access, right?
We focus on the gap in terms of needs and means of low-income Americans, but people above the poverty line, all the way up through much of the middle class, don't have the ability to pay for a lawyer, and without the ability to access a lawyer, you really very frequently lack access to justice. I mean, we are a legal society, and we are rationing justice at virtually every level below those who are wealthy.
And one of the areas that you jumped into through Lowenstein Sandler's the New Jersey Institute of Social Justice, that's an organization that is really pressing to eliminate that justice gap and address social justice issues.
Right.
And you're the chair of the board.
I'm the board chair. The first board chair was Nick Katzenbach, former Attorney General of the United States.
Right.
He was succeeded by somebody whom I had drafted to join the board, a then younger John Farmer.
Okay.
And
dean
I'll tell you a little bit more about John Farmer at some point. But John is the reason I'm here at Rutgers Law School.
Okay.
And the institute, actually, Alan came into my office in 1997 or 1998. He'd already incorporated the institute. He had a list of people he wanted to recruit for the board, and he asked me to go recruit them for him in the institute. And that's how we got started. The institute basically has three principal sources of projects. One is criminal justice, juvenile justice. We've done a lot in prisoner reentry and juvenile justice reform, reinstating the vote for convicted felons, bail reform. We were the sort of the linchpin for the Newark 2020 economic development project that's aiming to reduce unemployment among Newark residents by 20%. And we are doing a lot in the voting rights area as well.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful organization. It's 3 blocks from us. I know that Professor Elise Body, another faculty member here, is a board member, and we've had, I believe, other board members too, right?
We have. John Dubin was an original founding trustee with me.
Okay.
And Sandra King, who was the producer of Due Process for many years, and whose home was here in those last remaining years, was also on the board, and of course, as I mentioned, John Farmer.
Yeah, and it's just an absolutely outstanding organization, and its dynamic executive director, Ryan Haygood, is going to be our commencement speaker this year.
Oh, fabulous.
So everybody's very excited about that.
I think they should be. They should be. He's just a powerful force for good in this society.
That's wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about corporate law at Rutgers. I don't know if you remember our first lunch, I think the very first week I started, and we went.
I stalked you.
You stalked me.
I wanted to tell you about the center.
Right, and I wanted to hear about the center because I think that one sometimes misconception, which I think is really belied by our outstanding alumni network across the country, but I think Rutgers Law School in Newark has always had a reputation of being a center for social justice, and it is. But I think that one thing that you've done is you also have put us on the map for corporate law, and obviously we have many alumni around the world who have been very successful in business law and corporate litigation, securities and derivatives, and so it's a fantastic network. And I know that many of our students are also moving into the private sector. And so why don't you talk about that? Talk about sort of your objectives in terms of the founding of the center and what you want and where you see its role at Rutgers Law School.
So for starters, corporate lawyers can be and frequently are public interest lawyers, serving the public interest and serving their communities.
Yeah.
So we'll start with our affiliated faculty. We have a really strong, deep, and broad bench of faculty members who teach and research and write in all aspects of international and domestic business and corporate law. And it's just a very vibrant learning group. So the center is actually a concept that Alan Lowenstein articulated in providing his gift to the university to create the chair I now occupy. And the concept was that a law school can be more than a center of learning. It can be a law center that serves its community and its students and faculty at the same time. So what we've tried to do in the center is create a forum and a home for interdisciplinary thought, discussion, programming that serves as bridges between the law school and the corporate and business community. And bridges are two-way. These are two-way bridges. We bring people in from the corporate and governance world to participate. They come in as guest speakers in our classes. They come in to participate in our programs and our conferences. But we also send our students back into that world, and the two meet and get together actually with fairly significant regularity at our different programs. So we have the programming includes a wide array of conferences and programs. We're the sponsor of the Entrepreneurship Clinic, which is a virtual law firm that provides transactional legal assistance to essentially or largely tech startups. And it's a full range of services. And again, we're serving our community in doing that. We also have a certificate program for students who want to specialize in corporate and business law, and they will graduate if they do that with a certificate that can distinguish themselves in the job market as being well prepared and serious about corporate and governance law. So, yeah, we have had about 40 students a year graduate with the certificate so far, with which we're pleased.
And one of the things that's really kind of interesting and neat about the center is that we are in the fourth year of the merger of Rutgers Camden and Rutgers Newark, but the center actually preceded the merger. It was sort of like a proto-merged entity, right?
So I had Ray Solomon was dean at Rutgers Camden when I arrived here at Rutgers Newark, and Ray and I share a best friend named Mark Taylor who teaches religion at Columbia and Williams.
Okay.
And Ray had invited me to be a speaker in Rutgers Camden after he became dean. So when I got here, I called him to say, I'm thinking about setting up a center. Who on your faculty would be a good person to partner with? And he immediately said Arthur Levy, and lo and behold, Arthur Levy has been a partner in this endeavor ever since.
And what is Professor Levy's specialty?
Corporate and business law.
Corporate and business
law. And he had a very senior position in the Securities Exchange Commission before he got to Rutgers Law School. And the center really has been a partnership of our two locations and faculty We have a wonderful advisory board that's populated, among others, by the general counsel of a number of New Jersey companies, general counsel or deputy general counsel, Johnson & Johnson, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield, Prudential Financial, just to name a few. And on the nonprofit side, our J.W. Barnabas.
Right.
And we regularly tap into that advisory group for suggestions for programming, for volunteers to participate in the programming, and for financial support as well.
And last year, I remember that you invited the former general counsel at BlackRock Investments, Matthew Mallow. And I was sitting next to him at the advisory board meeting, and he leaned over to me after hearing all the introductions of the faculty and the different board members. He's like, I did not realize that the Rutgers Law business offering was so deep. And he goes, and the really, really amazing thing about the center, it's really one of the few centers in the United States that is actually focused on governance issues. Mm. And so that made me very proud, even though I didn't have anything to do with it. It's all you and the people who preceded me, but it really made me proud, to know that, such an influential figure kind of recognized the work that we were doing in that area.
BlackRock is really... Well, I mean, they have $7 trillion under management. They're the largest money asset manager in the world. But their chair and CEO, Larry Fink, has been really leading the investment community in the direction of what is now called ESG, or environmental, social, and governance sustainability investing, but is a very significant part of corporate social responsibility as well.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I know that the center has focused on, and I think that's something that has really emerged very powerfully, I think, in corporate America over the last several years. The whole notion of ESG and these sort of changing juridical understandings of the role of a corporation in society. Do you want to talk about that?
I do. It's been several years ago. The SEC had a roundtable inviting comments on whether or not the SEC should mandate disclosure of ESG-related matters that go beyond financial materiality. They got an enormous affirmative response and then did nothing. Fast forward a little bit, I think a year or two later, a formal petition for rulemaking was filed just before the last presidential election. So it looked like the SEC under President Obama might have been moving to mandate more disclosure, and the idea behind mandating disclosure is to affect behavioral change. We want corporations to be much more mindful of the environment and their impact on it, especially climate change. We want them to be aware of and considerate of their communities in which they operate, and we want them to pay a lot more attention to their workforce and their workforce development and supporting their workers and compensating them adequately and providing for their retirement as well.
I interviewed Professor Carlos Ball, who just wrote a book about the leadership role of corporations in the LGBTQ rights movement. So we were talking about really how that came to pass, and he really, I think, highlighted the fact that several people on the inside started to push issues of equality, and really led many corporations to become sort of a counterweight to, propose state legislation or government action that really, I think, restricted those rights. And it was really a very interesting conversation about, the potential of corporate America to sort of move into the space. And what I wanted to ask you is, that's not an isolated example. I know in the area, for instance, of climate change, which is very, very important, I think that perhaps the public doesn't really understand that much how active, corporations are on this issue.
Well,
some corporations.
Yeah, but I mean,
in terms of sort of addressing, the reality of climate change.
What we're seeing in the ESG area is a major private ordering going on within the corporate world, and by that I mean, even though we're not seeing mandates from this administration's SEC for such disclosure that would perhaps alter corporate behavior. There have been a significant number of new mutual funds that were created that focus on investing in companies that are observant of ESG issues. And to bring BlackRock back into the picture for a second, BlackRock has a variety of index funds. They're passive funds. They don't buy and sell shares. They hold them for their own investors, long-term 401k, retirees, and the like. And the only way they can affect corporate behavior at their portfolio companies is by giving them guidance for how they're going to vote their shares for shareholder proposals or for the re-election of directors or the like. And between BlackRock, State Street Advisors, and Vanguard, those three money managers own 20% of all of corporate America's shares. So when Larry Fink in his annual letter this year to all the companies in which BlackRock invests saying, we are going to pay more attention to ESG this year. We are prepared to vote our shares in furtherance of that. We want to see you start disclosing ESG, and there's this new set of metrics for ESG that something called the Accountability Standards Advisory Board just came out with last fall. We want you to use those new metrics to define what you're doing and the impact you're having in these areas. State Street Bank then followed it within a few weeks. We haven't seen Vanguard yet, but that can be over time extremely meaningful and a very good counterweight against what we call short-termist investor strategy that are value extracting rather than value adding in terms of what they're asking boards of directors and management to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and that's been accompanied by, sort of change in the way we understand legal doctrine about corporations as well.
So huge debate about corporate purpose going on right now. I think we are moving very rapidly away from Milton Friedman's Sunday New York Times Magazine article declaring that the only purpose of a corporation is to make profits for its shareholders. The conference board of senior executives of the leading public companies came out last year with a new statement of principle that acknowledges stakeholder priorities, namely our workers, our environment, our communities, and also our shareholders. But if we serve the first three well, we will be serving our shareholders in terms of long-term sustainability. So I've changed how I teach business organizations in this area now, and we have an entire class on business purpose coming up in our current issues in corporate governance. And incidentally, tomorrow we have the vice president for stewardship for BlackRock coming as our guest speaker in our corporate governance class.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I know that your class is very popular. I talk to our students, and so I think business associations with Professor Eakley is almost a rite of passage here at Rutgers Law School. The business faculty is very popular, right? I know that Professor Shaheen is very well known in the tax and international tax field. Professor Guseva has helped sponsor 2 conferences on blockchain technology, and that's something that I had made the point of refusing to learn about when I was in the private sector and the government, because I felt like it just reflected a world that had passed me by. But I think with Professor Guseva's enthusiasm, I became much more enthusiastic about understanding it and making sure that our students were always on the cutting edge of these types of changes. Do you want to talk a little bit about
Sure.
blockchain?
Well, blockchain or distributed ledger technology is literally it's already revolutionizing the financial world, but it's going to make a sea change in the practice of law and thus in what we should learn and teach in law schools. And in fact, to that end, Professor Guseva is introducing a new course on blockchain and the law.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So we have a grant from a company called a blockchain-related exchange called Ripple to develop a blockchain and crypto asset community of learning, part of which is this course. Professor Guseva has been involved in a major research project involving the SEC's approach to regulating crypto assets, and we hope to build on this.
What would you say to people like me who learn how to shepherdize with books and learn legal research in libraries with actual books and, had developed some skills that that are still necessary, but the way we do them may feel a little bit outdated. What would be your pep talk for people who might be a little bit resistant to understanding, these rapid technological changes?
Well, I'm smiling in part because
You're that person also.
You're right. You're looking at the wrong person if you want guidance from me. But I can appreciate, it is impossible not to appreciate what technology has meant to how we research the law and research the facts that go with the law, and how we produce and distribute that research. So law is not a trade, but technology is a tool of the trade. And if there are if in litigation, for example, if you're litigating against a team that is more technologically astute than you, you're going to be at a disadvantage.
And I know that we're also, we also opened up a banking law class, and that's something that we're moving into more aggressively. We have certainly a wonderful alumnus who's or the current general counsel, I believe, at Bank of Japan.
Mitsui Sumitomo, Bruce Ertwine.
Right, okay.
Who's just been one of the most active members of our advisory board. He's come in as a guest speaker in both my compliance and governance classes. And he has funded not just this position to teach a course on financial regulation, but he's funded a major conference which we're having on April 24 on a 10-year look back at Dodd-Frank. Dodd-Frank was this enormous piece of legislation that came in as a congressional response to the financial crisis and Great Recession, and it was enacted in 2010. And we have an array of really impressive people who lived through and many of whom regulated or implemented Dodd-Frank when it came into effect.
Yes, and that's obviously a very timely and important subject in corporate law. So I'm very proud that Rutgers Law will be able to host that conference. And of course, it's open to the public, right?
It is definitely open to the public. We're going to hopefully get a save the date flyer out by the end of this week so people can see some of the extraordinary people who have agreed to come in and speak to us about it.
Anything else you want to sort of highlight with our affiliated business faculty or with the center?
You touched on it, but it's not. They're not only wonderful and wonderfully diverse, but it's ecumenical. Matteo Gatti is brilliant. Sarah Darush, brilliant. You've already mentioned Yoyi Gasteva.
Yeah.
Plus our own Andy Rothman and Andy Rosner, and the list goes on.
Let's circle back really quickly to how you got to Rutgers Law School, because I think you started that story, but I don't even know that story.
So when I was a litigation partner at Reichert Danzig many years ago, a very young John Farmer, who was then clerking for New Jersey Supreme Court Justice Alan Handler, was directed by Justice Handler to look me up. And we wound up hiring John, and John became a junior member of my litigation team. And indeed, one of the big cases I was actively involved in then that I continued for 20 years was the Abbott against Burke school funding litigation. I was counsel for the League of Women Voters of New Jersey as amicus, but was the only lawyer that the court permitted to argue among the various amici. So I argued, I don't know how many, 5 or 6 of the Abbott cases. And the particular brief that John Farmer and I signed took the position that thorough and efficient education also required adequate buildings that could house schools in which kids could learn. And the court actually, in a decision written by Justice Handler, literally quoted from our brief in ruling that thorough and efficient required school construction as well. So John left for the U.S. Attorney's Office and then went into his very distinguished mode. But at some point, maybe 15 years ago, we would interact from time to time. But I finally brought him onto the board of the Institute for Social Justice, and when Nick Katzenbeck decided he was going to retire, John moved into being chair. And we were at an institute gala when John said, as an aside, I want to talk to you sometime about the Lowenstein chair. And I was aware, because both of Alan's sons are on the board of the Institute, that Alan had endowed the chair, but the chair had not been occupied. And teaching was not on my radar screen, not in my plans. I wasn't planning on retiring from the practice either, but John basically said, try it, you'll like it, and you don't need to leave Lowenstein to do that. Well, I tried it, and I liked it, so much that although I didn't completely leave Lowenstein, I retired as a partner, and I don't even have an office there anymore, but I'm of counsel. So I still keep my big toe in the water.
You're like me. I think both of us are litigators who came into academia and came to Rutgers, and I think it's fair to say fell in love with it.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I just it's the totality of Rutgers, but in particular the students.
Yeah.
It's their diversity. There's no sense of privilege. It's their commitment, obviously, to community. It's their eagerness to learn about the real world and how you maneuver within the real world. And they are a constant source of learning for me.
Yeah. Very, very hardworking and humble. In fact, sometimes I try to instill a little bit more swagger in them because I think that, they are, as a whole, I think a very hardworking, very intelligent group. It's a great, great environment. I think just walking into this building every day. Now, I know from our numbers that we have many, many other listeners out there, but we have different audiences. So I always want to sort of reach the practicing lawyer so they know what's coming down here, and they, hopefully will show up for Dodd-Frank, and they'll think a little bit more about, Rutgers Law School as a center for corporate law. I want to reach the academics, so I want to make sure that, we're able to highlight some of the complex issues. I also want to reach students who are applying to law school and trying to think about where I want to go. What would you say to those students in terms of what Rutgers has to offer with respect to corporate law and generally?
Right. Well, the corporate law, I think if you go on the website of the center, cclg.rutgers.edu, there's a drop-down that gives you both the requirements for the certificate, but also the wonderful array of courses that you can take either as core courses or as electives to earn the certificate. But we start with a core course of business organizations, and then there are other required courses. You don't have to take all of them, but we offer corporate tax, we offer bankruptcy and reorganization, consumer protection, financial regulation, antitrust, mergers and acquisitions, securities regulation, employment law, international business organizations. My two seminars, Current Issues in Corporate Governance and Compliance and Enterprise Risk Management. The Entrepreneurship Clinic. We have a competition in transaction negotiation that is very popular.
Very popular. I don't mean to interrupt, but I did introductions for that event. I went to the lunch. And that is such an outstanding program. Yeah. The students love it so much. It's an amazing, amazing program.
So we team students up in pairs, in teams of two. They negotiate a transaction against another team of two. And each of the negotiations is separately evaluated by a practitioner who comes in from the law school to be a judge. Sort of just to repeat, broad and deep bench provides for a broad and deep curriculum in this area, plus a lot of practical, hands-on, experiential learning that comes with it. I think the quality of the education you get here in corporate and business law is equal to the best law schools anywhere. I think if you do well here, you will leave as well prepared as you could anywhere else to practice law, either inside a corporation or in a law firm. And I think you are going to be as marketable as students from private law schools charging a lot more tuition to get the degree that will provide you with an entry into the practice of law.
Yeah, and as dean, I will often say, because I believe it, in many instances better prepared because of the longstanding and eclectic and inclusive community that we have here, both in the student body and the faculty. I think really gives the students just an amazing leg up as they go off on their various paths.
Yep, agreed.
Well, we're very, very honored and very privileged to have you as a member of this community. You've done such outstanding work and are very, beloved by your colleagues and by the students, and really appreciate you joining us.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad I'm here. It's been just a remarkable, wonderful experience.
Thank you. The Power of Attorney is produced by Rutgers Law School. With 2 locations minutes from Philadelphia and New York City, Rutgers Law offers the prestige and reputation of a large, nationally known university with a personal, small campus experience. Learn more about Rutgers Law by visiting law.rutgers.edu.